A retired Marine Corps Sergeant, Arthur Blake, quietly dedicates his life to honoring fallen comrades and serving his Ohio community. When he unexpectedly testifies in court to defend a young black man wrongfully accused, he reveals a powerful connection to the man's grandfather, a fellow Marine who once saved his life in Vietnam. Arthur's quiet act of integrity sparks a ripple of change, inspiring the young man, Darius Langston, to pursue justice, carry on Arthur's legacy, and build a life of purpose. Welcome to my channel. My name's Arthur Blake. I'm 77, a retired Marine Corps sergeant, and I've lived alone for the past 18 years in a weather-beaten duplex at the end of Willow Lane in a quiet corner of Springfield, Ohio. Every morning, without fail, I shine my old combat boots until the leather glows like dark glass. Then I hoist the American flag outside my door and head down to Liberty Square Park, where I spend a couple hours picking up trash people leave behind, fast food bags, broken beer bottles, the occasional juice box crushed flat like a pancake. It's my ritual. Rain, shine, or snow, I walk that park's winding paths with a grabber stick in one hand and a canvas bag in the other. When my joints ache too badly, I walk slower. When the pain flares like wildfire through my knees, I grit my teeth and keep going. I don't do it for recognition. I do it because it needs doing. Most folks in town think I'm just some cracked old-timer stuck in the past. Kids cross the street when I'm coming. Teens sometimes shout from across the park, mock salutes, fake gun noises, all that. Hey, Sergeant, the war's over, they laugh. Or they'll duck behind a tree and pretend to be snipers, giggling like they're original. Neighbors don't talk to me much. Not out of hate, just that awkward avoidance people get when they're near someone whose presence stirs up things they'd rather forget. War. Sacrifice. Consequences. I think seeing me reminds them of their own comfortable indifference. Only one person ever speaks to me regularly, Lucinda Morales. She runs the corner bodega down on 5th Street. Lost her grandson, Miguel, in Kabul. She keeps a picture of him by the register and gives me a warm nod every morning when I stop by for my black coffee and hard roll. No one knows I still wear my dog tags. They rest under my shirt like ghosts clinking quietly against my chest. A couple of weeks ago, I received a court summons. Thought it was a mistake at first. Witness in a criminal case? The defendant was a 22-year-old black man named Darius Langston, charged with assaulting a police officer during what the report called a routine wellness check. Didn't make sense why someone like me would be called. I hadn't spoken to a lawyer, hadn't filed a report. But the date was stamped, and my name was on it clear as day. So I showed up. That Tuesday morning, I rose early, earlier than usual. Pulled my old dress blues out of the garment bag I kept sealed in my closet. The fabric smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. The uniform hung looser on me than it used to. My shoulders aren't what they were. Still, I buttoned it up with hands stiff from neuropathy, each movement a slow negotiation between memory and pain. I pinned my medals, one by one. Bronze Star, Navy Commendation, Purple Heart. Each told a story I rarely shared. When I looked in the mirror and placed the old garrison cap on my head, I didn't see a hero. I saw a man with unfinished business. When I walked into the courthouse, the place was already buzzing. Young lawyers in tight suits hustling past with coffee and case files. One of them took a look at me and muttered to his colleague, "Check out GI Grandpa. Somebody's early for the 4th of July parade." A security guard chuckled. "Wrong building, sir. The museum's down the block." I heard them. Of course I did. But I didn't respond. Just adjusted my cap, straightened my spine, and walked toward courtroom 4. As I passed through the metal detector, I noticed the stairs. A few folks pulled out their phones. One woman pulled her daughter close like I was contagious. No one spoke. That silence, awkward, uncertain, followed me into the courtroom like a fog. I took a seat in the last row. Back straight, boots flat, eyes forward. Across the room sat Darius Langston. Broad shoulders, sharp eyes, wearing a too-big suit someone probably loaned him. His public defender, a young guy barely out of law school, looked like he'd already lost the case in his head. The prosecution presented their story like it was scripted. Said Darius had resisted, raised his hands aggressively, posed a threat. They showed a grainy body cam clip that cut off right before anything important happened. The cop he'd supposedly assaulted wasn't even injured, barely a scratch. But they pressed on, painting Darius like a walking problem. Then, something unexpected happened. The defense attorney, nervously adjusting his tie, stood up and said, "Your Honor, the defense would like to call a surprise witness. Sergeant Arthur Blake, United States Marine Corps, retired." The courtroom turned. I stood. And right then, every uniformed officer in the room stood too. All at once. No order. No command. Just muscle memory and respect. A young bailiff with a buzz cut. I recognized his eyes. Same as one of my recruits from Camp Pendleton decades ago. Didn't say a word, but he nodded once, like we shared something no one else could see. I walked down the aisle slow but steady, boots clicking on tile. And for the first time in years, I knew why I was there. To keep a promise. To speak for someone who couldn't speak for himself. To be the kind of witness I wish someone had been for me all those years ago. I stepped into the witness box with the same deliberate calm I used to walk through minefields. The clerk swore me in, and the courtroom settled into that quiet kind of stillness you only hear in places where lives are about to change. The defense attorney, he couldn't have been older than 30, looked at me with a mix of hope and desperation. "Mr. Blake," he said, clearing his throat, "can you tell the court where you were on the afternoon of May 6th? I nodded, my voice slow and graveled. At approximately 2:15, I was walking through Ashford Park, like I do every day. I was near the southeast pavilion, just past the duck pond. And what did you see there?" I shifted slightly in my seat. There was a man, homeless, maybe late 50s, wearing an old army field jacket. He was collapsed on the ground, having a seizure. Convulsions. Jaw clenched. I knew the signs. And what happened next? A police cruiser pulled up. One officer got out, Officer Caleb Rourke, badge number 7821. I wrote it down later. He didn't call for EMTs right away. Instead, he started yelling at the man to get up. When the man didn't respond, Officer Rourke struck him with his baton. Murmurs rippled through the room. "And Mr. Langston?" the attorney asked, motioning to the defendant. "What was his involvement?" I looked over at Darius. He met my gaze for the first time, uncertain, confused. He was there too, watching from the bus stop across the street. When he saw the officer strike the man again, he stepped in, hands raised, not threatening, just saying, "Sir, please stop. He's sick. Look at his wrist. That's a seizure tag." He didn't shove, didn't hit. He tried to de-escalate. The defense lawyer turned to the judge. "Your Honor, I'd like to introduce a new piece of evidence, security footage from a florist shop across the street. It shows the full incident from a wide angle." The judge leaned forward now, interested. The screen lit up with the footage. It was grainy, sure, but it showed exactly what I described. A man convulsing. The officer standing over him. And Darius stepping into frame, palms out, voice raised, not in anger but concern. The room watched in silence. The prosecution began shifting uncomfortably. The lead prosecutor, a woman in a tailored gray suit with a voice like cold iron, stood up. "Objection. This footage wasn't submitted during discovery." The judge frowned. The prosecution had ample opportunity to present a complete narrative. "This court will allow the evidence." The video ended. You could have heard a paperclip drop. The judge turned to me. "Mr. Blake, why are you testifying on behalf of the defendant?" I reached into the inside pocket of my uniform. My fingers found it, worn edges, leather soft with time. I pulled out a tiny, dog-eared photo. I held it up for the judge and jury. In the picture was a man in jungle fatigues, broad smile, arms around a fellow Marine. Me. That man, I said quietly, was Corporal Isaiah Langston. He saved my life outside Hugh City in '68. Threw himself over me when a mortar hit. Died in the field hospital 6 hours later. I pointed to Darius. "That's his grandson." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. I made a promise, standing next to Isaiah's body bag. Told him I'd look out for his family if I ever got the chance. Didn't even know what that would look like. But when I saw Darius step in to protect a man too weak to defend himself, well, I knew. That was the moment. Same courage, same heart. Just like his grandfather. The prosecutor leaned forward. "Mr. Blake, with respect, how can you be certain of that relationship?" I looked at her steadily. "Because I followed the family. Quietly. Didn't interfere. Sent birthday cards with no return address. Anonymously covered part of Darius's tuition when his mom couldn't swing it." The judge's face softened. "And why didn't you ever introduce yourself?" "Because a promise doesn't need an audience," I said. "It just needs to be kept." You could hear sniffles in the gallery now. The court stenographer had stopped typing. The prosecutor sat down slowly, like someone who just realized they'd brought a knife to a duel of truth. The judge cleared his throat. "Given this testimony and the new evidence, I see no justification for these charges. Case dismissed. Mr. Langston, you are free to go." As I stepped down from the stand, I felt a ripple of movement behind me. I turned and realized something I hadn't expected. Everyone was standing. Not because the judge told them to. Not for the verdict. For me. A moment later, Darius walked up to me slowly. "You knew my granddad?" he asked, voice shaking. I nodded. He swallowed. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" "Some debts," I said quietly, "can't be repaid. They can only be passed forward." The courtroom slowly emptied, but Darius and I just stood there, neither of us knowing quite what to say. There was no grand reconciliation, no sweeping music. Just two men, one old, one young, linked by blood that wasn't ours but bound us just the same. After a minute, he said, "Can I walk with you?" We stepped out into the courthouse lobby. The same security guard who'd laughed earlier now stood rigid by the doors, nodding at me with stiff respect. Funny how quickly the air can change when truth walks in. Outside, the sky had cracked open with late spring rain. I handed Darius my old umbrella, and we shared it, walking down the courthouse steps slowly. He broke the silence first. "You paid for my college apps?" I shrugged. "Didn't want you missing a shot because of some online fee. And those birthday cards, the ones with the old military stamps? That was me." He rubbed his chin, thinking. I always wondered. We reached the corner. I turned to go, but he stopped me. "Hey, wait. Can I see you again?" I paused. "I live on Willow. End of the lane. Red shutters, front porch with a flag." He nodded. "Sunday okay?" "Sunday's always okay." And so began a new rhythm. Every Sunday afternoon, Darius started showing up. At first awkward, he'd bring a box of gas station donuts and a couple of black coffees. We'd sit in my cramped living room beneath faded photographs of men in green fatigues, some frozen in time, some forever young. He started calling me Old Man Blake, then one day, jokingly at first, Father Arthur. The second time he said it, his voice cracked a little. That's when it stuck. We talked about everything and nothing. About his mother, who'd raised him solo with 3 jobs and no breaks. About law school, he'd gotten in on a scholarship and was knee-deep in criminal justice classes. He started telling me how the system was rigged to grind kids like him down before they even got a chance to stand. He was smart. Not just textbook smart, observant, grounded, full of that rare empathy that doesn't come from lectures but from life. And I listened. That's all I did, really. I listened. I didn't lecture him about the Corps or war or duty. Didn't need to. Darius had already lived through his own kind of battlefield. Funny thing happened over time. Those same neighborhood kids who used to mock me started crossing the street not to shout, but to give me a little space. Some even waved. They saw Darius beside me now, tall, sharp in his suit when he came from classes, and always walking a step behind like he respected something in me they never noticed before. One Saturday, we were sitting on the porch when the local police chief pulled up in an unmarked car. He climbed out slow, like a man carrying something heavy but invisible. "I came to apologize," he said, removing his cap. "To you, Mr. Blake. And to you, Mr. Langston." He admitted what we already knew, that Officer Rourke had doctored the report, that bias had colored the arrest, that they'd used a trimmed video to paint a false picture, that without my testimony, Darius would have been buried under the weight of a system blind to context. "I've reassigned Officer Rourke to community duty at the Veterans Center," he said. "Figured it was time he spent some time with men who know real courage." I didn't say much, just nodded. But inside, I felt something ease, like a knot that had sat tight in my chest for decades loosening. Just a bit. 6 months passed. And then one morning, neighbors noticed something strange. My flag hadn't been raised. My boots were still by the door, unlaced. No one had seen me walk to Liberty Square. Darius was the one who came to check. He knocked, waited, then let himself in. I was still in my chair, eyes closed, a photo of Bravo Company clutched in my hands. He called the paramedics. They said it had been peaceful, natural. The next week, they buried me at Hillside Cemetery. Veterans from across 3 counties attended, many I hadn't seen in years. They stood at attention for an hour beside my flag-draped casket, old bones trembling, but their backs straight as ever. Among them stood Darius Langston, now a law student in his final year, wearing my Purple Heart on his lapel. I'd left it to him in a small wooden box, along with a note that simply said, "For the man who stood up, just like his father once did." After the funeral, it took Darius a week to gather the courage to step into my house again. I'd left it tidy, always kept it that way, even if no one was coming by. The boots were lined up by the back door, polished just the day before I passed. The bed was made with military precision. On the kitchen table sat the Sunday crossword half-finished, my old pen resting beside it. It was like I just stepped out to pick up the morning paper. But I wasn't coming back. He walked the room slowly, taking it all in. The walls were lined with old photographs, most in black and white, some colorized with age. Men in uniform with sunburned faces and the kind of eyes you only see in people who've looked directly at death and kept walking. He stopped at the mantel. There, side by side, were two frames. One held a picture of Darius Langston, beaming with pride and fatigue, an M16 slung over his shoulder, jungle canopy behind him. The other frame showed Darius as a boy of maybe 9, in an ill-fitting suit, clutching the folded American flag from his father's funeral. His lips were pressed together in a stubborn attempt not to cry. For the first time, Darius understood the full weight of that image, not just what it had meant to his mother, or even to his younger self, but to me. I'd carried that photo in my wallet for years, watching him grow from a distance. I'd never stepped forward. I didn't want gratitude. I wanted to keep a promise. Darius found the will on the nightstand. Nothing fancy. Just a handwritten note, signed and witnessed at the local VFW hall. It gave him the house, the boots, and the box with my purple heart, wrapped in an oilcloth, along with a line that simply read, "If you ever wonder why I did it, look in the mirror." There was a small envelope taped beneath the desk drawer. Inside was a key and a single sentence, "Storage Unit 6B, Hilltop Lock-in Safe." He drove there the next morning. Inside the unit, lit by flickering fluorescent bulbs, were 6-foot lockers, each labeled with duct tape and a year. Journals, letters, field notes, photos, and taped to the inside of the lid of the final trunk was a quote. "The only thing more sacred than a brother's life is a brother's memory." Darius spent hours in there, learning about the men I'd led and lost. Names like Sanders, Mendoza, Hollister. Stories I'd never shared out loud. A few cassette tapes too, old recordings I made while talking to myself during long nights. On one of them, he heard my voice say, "I never had children. I wasn't brave enough. But if I had, I'd want them to be like Isaiah's boy. He doesn't even know how much of him is already his father. He carries it around like it's stitched into his spine." Darius wiped his eyes and walked back to the car with the box of tapes and journals, his hands trembling, as if he were carrying something fragile and holy. From that point on, everything changed. He started going back to Liberty Square on Sundays, walking the paths I used to patrol. At first, he brought a trash bag and gloves. Then others started joining him, kids from the community center, a couple of teachers, even one of the beat cops who'd once ignored me. Eventually, they renamed the West Trail Arthur Blake Memorial Walkway. The city held a small ceremony, no fireworks, no parade. Just veterans, kids, and stories. The mayor read a plaque aloud. "Judge not by appearances, but by the measure of honor within." Darius began speaking at local schools, not just about me, but about truth, about what real courage looks like, about the men and women who come home carrying wounds that don't bleed but never fully heal. He shared my journals, read passages that made rooms fall into hushed reverence. And each Veterans Day, like clockwork, he returned to the cemetery. He'd sit beside my grave with his daughter, yes, daughter, born 2 years after my passing, and show her the Purple Heart. She'd polish it with a little cloth he gave her. Said it was their tradition. "Who was he, Daddy?" she'd ask. And he'd reply, "Every year." He was a soldier, a promise keeper. And the reason you're free to ask questions. Darius never stopped visiting. The house on Willow Lane stayed exactly as I left it. He didn't renovate or repaint. Said the chipped porch rail and uneven steps were part of the story. He turned my old bedroom into a study. Left the flag in the window. The boot stayed by the door, always facing east. People in town started noticing him more, not just as the young man who beat a wrongful charge, but as someone who listened before he spoke. As someone who kept showing up. He joined the community board, helped mediate between local law enforcement and the youth groups. He wasn't loud. He didn't need to be. He carried weight the way his father had, quiet and steady. He wore my watch to his law school graduation. Wound it carefully that morning, just like I used to, until the second hand ticked into rhythm. And when he crossed the stage and shook hands with the dean, his mother sat in the front row, holding back tears. She knew what it meant. Knew that the man who wasn't there had still gotten him there. After the ceremony, he walked to the memorial wall at the courthouse, the same one I once passed, wearing dress blues that didn't fit like they used to. He placed a single folded note inside the small steel mailbox meant for veterans' letters. It read, "To the one who stood for me when it would have been easier to stay seated, thank you. I'm standing now. I won't sit down again." Not long after, Darius passed the bar. First try. He was offered jobs in bigger cities, even D.C., but he stayed right in Springfield. Said there was too much work to be done here. The first case he took pro bono was a landlord dispute, an elderly veteran being threatened with eviction for nuisance complaints because he listened to Glenn Miller a little too loud. Darius won the case, then had a Bluetooth speaker delivered to the man's porch with a note. "March on, Sergeant." The man cried when he read it. That year, Darius launched a legal initiative called the Oath Project. Pro bono legal services for veterans, families of veterans, and young people facing systemic bias. They worked out of an old firehouse on Ashford Street. Faded brick, leaky roof, but it buzzed with purpose. On the wall inside, he hung two framed images. One was the full courtroom transcript from the day I testified, the entire exchange, right down to the judge's final gavel drop. The other was that photograph of me and Isaiah in the jungle. Our arms around each other, sweat pouring, smiles wide in defiance of the hell we were standing in. At the bottom of the frame, etched into a bronze plate, was the phrase, "Some promises outlive the men who made them." Clients would stop and stare at those photos when they walked in. Some asked if he was related to either man. Darius always answered the same way. Both. One summer afternoon, he brought his daughter, Ava, to the park where we used to clean up trash. She was 5 now, curious, bold, just like he'd been. She ran through the grass, waving a stick like it was a saber, shouting, "I'm captain of the Marines," and Darius smiled, wide and proud. She didn't know it yet, but she was growing up inside a story written long before she was born. That same day, they stopped by my grave. Ava placed a bouquet of wildflowers at the headstone. She had made the arrangement herself, petals askew, stems crooked, but beautiful in its own way. "Do you miss him?" she asked. "Every day," Darius said. She looked at the engraved words. Arthur L. Blake, Marine Corps, Ret. A silent man who stood louder than most. Ava sat cross-legged on the grass, humming while she ran her fingers across the name. Then she looked up. Did he ever yell? Only when someone needed protecting. She thought for a moment, then smiled. "Then I'm gonna protect people too." And in that moment, Darius knew my oath hadn't ended with me. It had passed into his hands, and now into hers. Quiet, steady, unbreakable. A year after I passed, Darius received a letter postmarked from a veterans archive in Quantico. Inside was a worn manila envelope, handwritten in my old looping script. "Darius, if this found you, I suppose I didn't make it back from my latest patrol around the block. That's all right. I went quiet, like I lived, doing something I believed in." The envelope held my bronze star and a hand-drawn map on yellowed paper. The map showed the hilltop we defended back in Vietnam, the one where Isaiah Langston made his last stand. I traced it from memory, marking each position with initials of the men who didn't come home. I'd drawn one arrow, bold and red. Where Isaiah saved me. There was a note at the bottom. "Take your daughter here one day. Let her know her name was carved into history long before she could write it." Darius folded the paper and pressed it against his chest. He didn't take that trip right away. Instead, he framed the map and hung it in his office, right beside his law license. He began using it as a teaching tool, talking to high school classes about choices, about history that never makes it into textbooks. He called the talk Honor in the Shadows. Not everyone got it. Some kids rolled their eyes, thought it was just another war story. But some stayed after class, asking questions. One boy, Elijah, came up with tears in his eyes. "My uncle was in Fallujah," he said. "No one ever talks about him like this." "Thank you." That's when Darius knew the stories had to keep being told. Every year on Memorial Day, he organized a reading vigil. Names of local veterans, living and past, read aloud under the bronze plaque at the courthouse. He made sure the names that had faded into time were spoken again. "Arthur Blake," someone would say into the mic. And Darius would whisper back, "Present." There's an old bench beneath a red maple tree in Liberty Square. Nothing fancy, just with slats and iron arms, painted green. But it was where I'd sit when the pain got bad, when my knees reminded me that the body always keeps score. One autumn afternoon, years after my passing, Darius brought Ava to that very bench. She carried a cloth bundle. Inside was my folded flag. "Is this Grandpa Blake's spot?" she asked. Darius nodded. "Every Sunday." She looked around, then gently placed the flag on the bench. Then he should still have a seat. Later that month, the city installed a plaque right beside it. Small, simple, powerful, reserved for those who served. Especially the quiet ones. People started leaving things there: challenge coins, handwritten notes, even old medals. not in tribute to me personally, but to what I represented, the silent keepers of promises. The men and women who never made headlines, but changed lives anyway. Darius never spoke much when he visited. He'd just sit, sometimes with a legal file in hand, sometimes just listening to the wind. One time, a teenager sat beside him and asked, "Are you that guy who helped get my cousin out of lockup?" "Yeah," Darius said. "I thought you'd be. I don't know. More famous." Darius smiled. "Famous isn't the point." The kid nodded slowly, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a folded paper. "I wrote this, in juvie. I didn't know where to send it." He left it under the plaque. And Darius knew. It was working. On a gray Wednesday morning, a young journalist named Lena Rodriguez showed up at Darius's office. She worked for the Springfield Herald, bright-eyed, sharp, always chasing stories that meant something. "I keep hearing about you," she said. "And this bench. And Arthur Blake." Darius didn't smile. He just nodded. She pointed at the wall, to the framed courtroom transcript. Who was he really? Darius thought for a long moment before answering. He was a man who showed up when it mattered most and didn't ask for applause. Lena published the piece 2 days later. The headline read, "The veteran who made a town stand still." It wasn't a viral sensation. It didn't blow up online, but it found the right readers. Veterans cut it out and mailed it to each other. School teachers printed it out for their history lessons. One man read it aloud at a VFW meeting, then folded it into his Bible. A few weeks later, a letter arrived at Darius's office. No return address. No signature. Just a line written in neat, deliberate penmanship. "He stood for me once, and I never forgot it. I still don't drink coffee without thinking of him." Darius placed the note in a shoebox where he kept small things, old photos, his father's dog tags, and the Purple Heart I'd left him. That box wasn't a collection. It was a legacy. Years later, Darius stood in the very same courtroom where I'd once worn my old dress blues and made the room fall silent. Only now, he stood behind the judge's bench. He wasn't a public defender anymore. Wasn't a community advocate. He'd been sworn in as Judge Darius Langston, the youngest ever appointed to the bench in the district. That old courtroom had seen its share of justice and injustice. Darius intended to tip the scales the right way, every day he walked in. The first thing he did? He had a quote engraved above the doorframe. "Don't judge by appearances, but by the measure of honor within." Blake. Most people didn't know who that was, but they'd feel it when they stepped into his courtroom. One day, a nervous young man stood before him. First offense, petty theft. Darius studied the file, then looked up. "You ever hear of Arthur Blake?" he asked. The kid shook his head. Darius slid a folded paper across the bench. "It was a photocopy of my testimony, lightly marked in pen. Take this home. Read it. Come back next week and tell me what you think." The next week, the kid showed up with tears in his eyes. "I didn't know people like that existed." "They do," Darius said. "But you gotta be one of them now. Understand?" The boy nodded. Case dismissed. On one condition, community hours in Liberty Square. The bench still stood there. The plaque still caught the sunlight. And on most days, someone sat beside it, quietly reading, reflecting, or just resting. Just like I used to. It was Veterans Day again. Chilly, with that clean blue November sky that always feels like a fresh page. Darius arrived early at Hillside Cemetery, Ava trailing behind him with a thermos of cocoa and a soft cloth folded neatly in her coat pocket. She was older now, 12, but still called it our mission every year. They walked past rows of flags, the crunch of leaves under their feet, until they reached my headstone. Darius knelt first, brushing away the twigs and pine needles. Ava placed the cloth on the marble slab and gently polished the Purple Heart that hung on its brass hook. They sat in silence a while. No big speech. No ceremony. Just presence. Across the lawn, a group of young veterans in clean uniforms stood in formation. They weren't part of a parade. They weren't even on the official schedule. But one of them, a young woman with close-cropped hair and 3 chevrons on her sleeve, stepped forward. She saluted the grave, then turned to Ava. "Are you his granddaughter?" she asked. Ava smiled. "Not by blood. By promise." The soldier nodded. "He stood for my uncle once. Back in the courtroom. Saved his future. Just wanted to pay my respects." Darius watched the moment quietly. His throat tightened. Because somehow, over time, through stories and stillness, through quiet actions and the long shadow of integrity, what I stood for had taken root. Not just in Ava, but in the people who showed up. In the silence that spread when truth walked into a room. That night, back at home, Ava sat cross-legged on the floor, unfolding an old shoebox. She pulled out my watch, my photo with Isaiah, and the map I'd drawn in red pencil. "Dad?" she asked. "Yeah. What happens when I grow up, and you're not around to remind me what this means?" Darius smiled. "You won't need reminding," he said, "because by then, you'll be the one doing the reminding." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Like he did for you?" "Exactly like that." Out on Willow Lane, the porch light glowed under a quiet flag. And somewhere, deep in the bones of the town, an old bench kept its silent vigil, still reserved for anyone who ever carried more than their share and kept going anyway. Because real honor doesn't announce itself. It just shows up and stands, even when nobody's watching.